Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show is the argument that Ketanji Brown Jackson gives in this Supreme Court hearing. I'm going to let y'all hear what she says.
Yes, I am so glad for Justice Barrett's clarification because I had the same thought about what you were arguing, and I'm glad that you clarified that your core point is that the Jingles test has to have a race neutral baseline, or that the first step has to be race neutral. And what I guess I'm a little confused about in light of that argument is why, given our normal assessment of the Constitution, why is it that you think that there's a 14th Amendment problem? And let me just clarify what I mean by that. I don't think we can assume that just because race is taken into account, that necessarily creates an equal protection problem, because I understood that we looked at the history and traditions of the Constitution, at what the framers and the founders thought about. And when I drilled down to that level of analysis, it became clear to me that the framers themselves adopted the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment in a race conscious way. That they were, in fact, trying to ensure that people who had been discriminated against, the freedmen, during the Reconstruction period, were actually brought equal to everyone else in society. So I looked at the report that was submitted by the Joint Committee on Reconstruction, which drafted the 14th Amendment. And that report says that the entire point of the amendment was to secure rights of the freed former slaves. The legislator who introduced that amendment said that, quote, unless the Constitution should restrain them, those states will all, I fear, keep up this discrimination and crush to death the hated freedmen. That's not that's not a race neutral or race blind idea in terms of the remedy. And even more than that, I don't think that the historical record establishes that the founders believed that race neutrality or race blindness was required, right? They drafted the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which specifically stated that citizens would have the same civil rights as enjoyed by white citizens. That's the point of that act, to make sure that the other citizens, the black citizens, would have the same as the white citizens. So they recognized that there was unequal treatment, that people based on their race were being treated unequally. And importantly, when there was a concern that the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have a constitutional foundation, that's when the 14th Amendment came into play. It was drafted to give a foundational, a constitutional foundation for a piece of legislation that was designed to make people who had less opportunity and less rights equal to white citizens. So, with that as the framing in the background, I'm trying to understand your position that Section 2, which by its plain text is doing that same thing, is saying you need to identify people in this community who have less opportunity and less ability to participate and ensure that that's remedied, right? It's a race conscious effort, as you have indicated. I'm trying to understand why that violates the 14th Amendment, given the history and background of the 14th Amendment.
The 14th Amendment is a
Um, for rebuilding a shattered a nation which thou not dissevered, ways yet shaken and riven by the gigantic and persistent efforts of 6 million able and ardent men, of bitter rebels striving through 4 years of bloody war. It cannot be denied that this terrible struggle sprang from vicious principles incorporated into the institutions of our country. Our fathers had been compelled to postpone the principles of their great declaration and wait for the full establishment till a more propitious time. That time ought to be present now, but the public mind has been educated in error for a century. How difficult in a day to unlearn it. In rebuilding, it is necessary to clear away the rotten and defective portions of the old foundations, and to sink deep and found the repaired edifice upon the firm foundation of eternal justice. If perchance the accumulated quicksands render it impossible to reach in every part so firm a basis, then it becomes our duty to drive deep and solid the substituted piles on which to build. It would not be wise to prevent the raising of the structure because some corner of it might be founded upon materials subject to the inevitable laws of mortal decay. It were better to shelter the household and trust to the advancing progress of a higher morality and a pure and more intelligent principle to underpin the defective corner. I would not for a moment inculcate the idea of surrendering a principle vital to justice, but if full justice could not be obtained at once, I would not refuse to do what is possible. The commander of an army who should find his enemy entrenched on impregnable heights would act unwisely if he insisted on marching his troops full in the face of a destructive fire merely to show his courage. Would it not be better to flank the works and march round and round and besiege and thus secure the surrender of the enemy, though it might cost time? The former course would show valor and folly, the latter moral and physical courage, as well as prudence and wisdom. Let us now refer to the provisions of the proposed amendment. The first section prohibits the states from abridging the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, or unlawfully depriving them of life, liberty, or property, or of denying to any person within their jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. I can hardly believe that any person can be found who will not admit that every one of these provisions is just. They are all asserted, in some form or other, in our Declaration or organic law. But the Constitution limits only the action of Congress and is not a limitation on the states. Excuse me. This amendment supplies that defect and allows Congress to correct the unjust legislation of the states so far that the law which operates upon one man shall operate equally upon all. Whatever whatever law punishes a white man for a crime shall punish the black man precisely in the same way and to the same degree. Whatever law protects the white man shall afford equal protection to the black man. Whatever means of redress is afforded to one shall be afforded to all. Whatever law allows the white man to testify in court shall allow the man of color to do the same. These are great advantages over the present codes. Now different degrees of punishment are inflicted, not on account of the magnitude of the crime, but according to the color of their skin. Now color disqualifies a man from testifying in courts, or being tried in the same ways as white men. I need not enumerate these partial and oppressive laws. Unless the Constitution should restrain them, those states will all, I fear, keep up this discrimination and crush to death the hated freedmen. Some answer, your Civil Rights Bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, secures the same things. That is partly true, but a law is repealable by a majority. And I need hardly say that the first time that the South, with their Copperhead allies, obtain the command of Congress, it will be repealed. The veto of the president and their votes on the bill are conclusive evidence of that. And yet I am amazed and alarmed at the impatience of certain well meaning Republicans at the exclusion of the rebel states until the Constitution shall be so amended as to restrain their despotic desires. This amendment, once adopted, cannot be annulled without two-thirds of Congress. That they will hardly get. And yet, certain of our distinguished friends propose to admit state after state before this becomes a part of the Constitution. What madness! Is their judgment misled by their kindness, or are they unconsciously drifting into the haven of power at the other end of the avenue? I do not suspect it, but others will. The second section I consider the most important in the article. It fixes the basis of representation in Congress. If any state shall exclude any of her adult male citizens from the elective franchise or abridge that right, she shall forfeit her right to the representation in the same proportion. The effect of this provision will be either to compel the states to grant universal suffrage or so to shear them of their power as to keep them forever in a hopeless minority in the national government, both legislative and executive. If they do not enfranchise the freedmen, it will give to the rebel states but 37 representatives. Thus, short of their power, they would soon become restive. Southern pride would not long brook a hopeless minority. True, it will take 2, 3, possibly 5 years before they conquer their prejudices sufficiently to allow their late slaves to become their equals at the polls. That short delay would not be injurious. In the meantime, the freedmen would become more enlightened and more fit to discharge the high duties of their new condition. In that time, too, the loyal Congress could mature their laws and so amend the Constitution as to secure the rights of every human being and render disunion impossible. Heaven forbid that the Southern states, or any of them, should be represented by this floor until such monuments of freedom are built high and firm. Against our will, they have been absent for 40 bloody years, or for 4 bloody years. Against our will, they must not come back until we are ready to receive them. Do not tell me they are loyal representatives waiting for admission. Until their states are loyal, they can have no standing here. They would merely misrepresent their constituents. The third section may encounter more difference of opinion here. Among the people, I believe it will be the most popular of all the provisions. It prohibits rebels from voting for members of Congress and electors of president until 1870. My only objection to it is that it is too lenient. I know that there is a morbid sensibility, sometimes called mercy, which affects a few of all classes, from the priest to the clown, which has more sympathy for the murderer on the gallows than for his victim. I hope have a heart's I hope I have a heart as capable of feeling for human woe as others. I have long since wished that capital punishment were abolished, but I never dreamed that all punishment could be dispensed with in human society. So that's the excerpt for the 14th Amendment speech that Thaddeus Stevens gave on introducing it. Now, here's a slightly different excerpt if we want to read to it, but basically it says a lot of the same stuff. So I'll just try to read through the parts that are different. Um, so let's see. basically says the same thing. I'm trying to see which part. That's the big difference. Actually, no, it just has a different introduction. Um, but yeah, so that's the speech introducing the 14th Amendment. We can read through the 14th Amendment really quickly. It's pretty short. There's 5 sections. I'll just read through it really quickly. So, 14th Amendment, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges, excuse me, or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed, but when the right to vote at any election for the choices for the choice of electors for president and vice president of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of the state, or the members of the legislative thereof, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged, except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress, or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may vote of 2/3 of each house remove such disability. Section 4. The validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services and suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned, but neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation of any slave, but all debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. Section 5. The Congress shall have power to enforce, by appropriate legislation, the provisions of this article. So, we just read through, well, first we listened to the argument that Ketanji Brown Jackson gave on that case, Merrill versus um, Milligan. Then we read through the reference that she used in that argument, which she referenced the joint resolution introducing the 14th Amendment. So we read through Thaddeus Stevens' argument and him introducing the 14th Amendment when he uses Freedmen 3 times. Um, and then we just read through the 14th Amendment, which was passed despite Andrew Jackson's veto. Um, so let's get into conversation. I'm going to send some mics out and we can start having a wider discussion about this. Um, Give me 1 second. Okay, so I sent out mics to everybody. Yeah, so what did y'all think about what Ketanji Brown Jackson said? What did you think about what Thaddeus Stevens said about introducing the 14th Amendment, all that.
Hey, I'm sorry. I was sitting here reading the 14th Amendment again.
No way.
That's okay. So when the actual case, refresh my memory, I was going to look at that next. The actual case that Ketanji, or Justice Brown, was actually, where she cited the 14th Amendment, wasn't that the one, do you remember what case that actually was? I wanted to ask you for the actual case.
Yeah, it's called Merrill versus Milligan. When I looked it up, here I'll read the summary that I gave. Give me 1 second. But yeah, those are the two
No,
people
go
in the
ahead.
case. No, keep going. I'm about to pull up that information real quick.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting is that her use of Freedmen, because I do not remember in any recent times that the use had been cited when any discussions have been made as it relates to the 14th, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So I know that it is. It's great that she actually did. But one of the reasons I kind of wanted to, this is a great topic, is because I heard her quote being misused and snippets of it, leaving out the Freedmen part where she actually used the our political. I think you went in the matrix.
Yeah, it sounded like you shut off at the end, but yeah, right when you said Freedmen, right when you said Freedmen, they were like, "Nah, we can't have that." But
just to give you a little context, it was the Asian people filing a case against trying to get rid of affirmative action. So that's
no, this one is actually different. So here's the Merrill versus Mulligan case. It says, which is a challenge to Alabama's new congressional districts. The districts constitute a racial gerrymander, where Republican lawmakers packed most black residents into one district, giving white voters control over the remaining 6 districts. The Voting Rights Act (VRA) is designed to outlaw this dilution of racial minorities' voting power, and in 1982, it was made clear that race-based vote dilution is impermissible. The case is currently being heard by the Supreme Court, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has argued that the Voting Rights Act cannot require the creation of districts in which racial minorities make up a majority because such race-conscious line drawing would infringe on equal protection. But the case he was talking about, the affirmative action, is also going on, and that is brought by the Asians about Harvard. It's basically about them getting into Harvard. But the Merrill versus Mulligan case, in which he talks about Freedmen, is this gerrymandering case. Let's see. So the other thing that you said inspired that's important is a lot of people are taking this out of context, and then they're only talking about the references to race, but they're not talking about the reference to the freedmen, which is really the legal standing that not only she stands on in her argument, but also Thaddeus Stephen uses it 3 times to talk about the freedmen in the context of the people who are the most hated and the people who need to be repaired. Um, and so, like, let's see if I even pull it up right now. Let's pull up the quotes when he uses it directly. So, one of them is, yeah, the one where he says, I need not enumerate these partial and oppressive laws unless the Constitution should restrain them. Those states will all, I fear, keep up this discrimination and crush to death the hated freedmen. And then the second time he uses it is, if they do not enfranchise the freedmen, it will give to the rebel states but 37 representatives. And then the other time he uses it, he says, in the In the meantime, the freedmen would become more enlightened and more fit to discharge the high duties of their condition. So basically, he uses it these three times, and in all of them, it's a reference to us as a specific group, and um, in the context of how race is used today, it's very clear that um, even if there was a large group of African immigrants, it would be clear that he's talking about the freedmen, um, and that this group of the freedmen is in this condition because of their former condition of slavery. Um, and so it's important that all of this is placed in that context where not only is the 14th Amendment being introduced in this context, then you have the 14th Amendment, and now you have Ketanji Brown referencing the joint resolution which introduced the 14th Amendment, that quoting literally Thaddeus Stevens in that quote about um, crushed to death the hated freedmen, right? So it's very clear who the group she's talking about, and um, you know, who the 14th Amendment is for, and the rest of these Reconstruction acts in context. And even to bring up what Grizz was saying, even in the context of the affirmative action case, um, it would strengthen our argument that all of these things are about freedmen because that was the initial thing that we were trying to correct. And um, it would strengthen the argument that these amendment, even the affirmative action, is for freedmen, not for all these other groups, right? Um, when we understand why all of these conditions were created in the first place and who they were designed to provide equal protection to, and the equal rights of citizenship, right? Life, liberty, property, etc. Um, Rob All Banks, did you want to say anything?
I'm listening. I heard you mention Alabama, and I was trying to see if I had heard anything about that case.
Oh yeah, that's the Milligan Merrill versus Milligan case. It's basically about them gerrymandering districts where they put all the black residents in one districts, and then there were 6 other districts that were mainly white voters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I still see some of that in a lot of these neighborhoods. I mean, as far as the whole state go, I haven't been around the whole state to see that, but just from where I am, yeah, a lot of that still goes on because they have been gentrifying the black communities, and I really don't even. I'm trying to find out where people are going because they're coming in with they're moving this amphitheater, and I don't know why I'm so stuck on that because they tore that. We had a whole hospital in our community, and that was benefiting the community, and some kind of way they just let it go to waste, and now all of a sudden they're coming back with this amphitheater thing, which a lot of people in the community are really not for that, but the city councilman, they're still trying to move forward with this, and it's a lot of the white guys that are on the councilman, they are gung-ho for this. Now we have a councilwoman, Miss Smithman, she's a black lady, and she is not for it, and I can agree with her because we need grocery stores in our community. We need other things in our community other than more entertainment to appease the people that's coming downtown. Because, like she said, once they go home, we still in the hood, and it's still looking like it's looking. So, I mean, yeah, that is still going down, and we really got it some kind of way. I'll be trying to get people to see some things, and I mean, it's I guess I feel like it's rough because when you try to talk to the people that are already set in their ways, like stone set in their ways of their quote unquote old way of living, a lot of people are just complacent and ready to die. And I guess I don't know if they're scared to fight or or what? Because I mean, we got a bunch of young people here that are ready, and if we can get them to stop doing what they're doing to each other and put them in the right direction, then a lot more stuff can get done. But like you said, that gerrymandering, they're putting all of the black people in a certain area so that they can have the majority in the area that they want. That's what they do. It's just like redlining. When too many black kids come to this certain quote unquote white school that's supposed to be all this and all that, and which in reality is not. It's a drug haven and everything else. But they try to keep our kids away from these schools. And sometimes in a sense of reality like that, I can say, yeah, I can agree with that. Because we don't want our children around that type of crap. Because we know we're not bringing this stuff in. We don't have the means to bring all this in. So it's got to be coming from somewhere. But they always want to try to say black people this, black people this. I mean, I'm in Alabama, for those that don't know. And man, I tell you, it's something serious here. I mean, some places might be better, but as far as for me and what I'm living and what I'm seeing, we need more work. I'm gonna stop with that.
Yeah, you know what's kind of crazy is when you think about what the case is about, them gerrymandering these districts, it's about congressional power, right?
Exactly.
And so if I can gerrymander these districts, we change how many people are represented by us, by them, so to speak. And they basically say, well, at max, you can get one representative. The freedmen basically could get one representative at most. We'll get the other six, and then we can decide what happens. But yeah, let me go to Phoenix, and then let me go to Black majority.
Peace and blessings, family. I love that this is the topic today, and just because of my experience today, which it wasn't a bad experience, it was just a confirming experience about how important it is for us to continue to delineate. There's two things going on. I'm sure you've heard about the San Francisco push for reparations for, well, air quotes, African Americans, right? And then also this case, and just having us delineated and speaking for ourselves and advocating for ourselves as founders of this country. So, because we are founders of this country, we are just as much as a unique, if not more, attached group to this soil. Because some of us have been here before any of the pilgrims. I'll just say that, I'm going to leave that alone. But we all are, no matter when we originated here, and or whether it was before slavery or during, we are all American freedmen, and I can't say this or stress this enough when I say, and maybe I should change my terminology or my wording in terms of we founded this country, we built this country, this is our country, everything on this land, even the systems within this country are American freedmen, of American freedmen intellectual properties that are just and more important than our free labor. So delineation and the use of American freedmen, and not just Black, because we see how it gets watered down when it's time for us to get our resources, you see. And as an educator, it's so funny to today I had a student who second generation Belizean, and that's fine. And I'm for all folks. I mean, really. But when it comes to us getting what we are because we're founders of this country, there's where I draw the line. But I am a lover of human beings, So she said it was just like the young girl high school speak, and she was just telling her story, but she was very much urban. You know what I mean? That you would not be able to tell whether she was from Belize or not. But just from her conversation, she let us know that her mom was. So I'm just saying, it's good to delineate because we do have people showing up that look and sound like us, but are not founders of this country. And that's the difference. So I love that Ketanji is speaking on this. I love, her representation of us and her bringing that to the forefront. And thank you, Freedmen Party, for reading the 14th Amendment. And it just gives us great pride and honor to call ourselves citizens. And we need to hold it and push it and give strength to it. We are not moving to any other place. This is our country that we built, and we have a lot to protect, and we will continue to protect it. But hold that badge of citizenship high and strong. And I land there.
Yeah, definitely. Citizenship is super important, and when we talk about the value of a vote over time, we inherit our ability not only to be citizens but our ability to vote by the fact that we're descendants of these freedmen, right? And when you think about 32 million freedmen eligible voters, that's a lot of uh, power that we have just by nature of still being here. And if we exercise it, we can realize more of our uh, due and more of our fair share of the pie. Let's go to Black Majority and then Lloyd, and then we'll pass it around again.
Hello. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Freedmen Party. So I put something in the chat and then in the jumbotron because whenever the 14th Amendment is brought up, I try to really let people understand the thought process behind it. And there's a link in it. It really explains what the thought process was behind it. And today, a lot of Second Amendment white males are referencing the 14th Amendment because it explains how and why they really, really wanted that to be, in the Constitution. And it was to protect Black Americans from state governments that did not want us to have the ability and the right to bear arms. So the 14th Amendment is really, and it's even quoted in that by, I believe that's a senator in that quote, but it's to give us the rights guaranteed by the first 8 amendments of the Constitution. And so I always hashtag 14A over 2A because for us, our right to bear arms really came out of that 14th Amendment. So, I'm gonna just rock with you guys. I'm at work, so I'm gonna listen in and tune in and everything. Thank you.
Definitely, and just to go to what you're saying, when Thaddeus Stevens is introducing the 14th Amendment, he talks about, how obvious it would be that he says not only was it a mistake that the original Constitution didn't include the prohibition of states, making laws that would go against the Constitution, essentially, right? So he says this is a key part of it, that no state can make an act basically that goes against the Constitution, that idea of equal protection. And then he underscores it by saying it's obvious that all of these states, given the opportunity, would undo not only this, if it was just a congressional act and not a constitutional amendment, they would undo it and repeal it. Whereas if it's a constitutional amendment, that process of needing 2/3 of Congress and then 3/4 of the states to ratify would make it virtually impossible for it to be undone. Um, Not that it's actually impossible, but just so hard that it would be almost nearly impossible to get done. And then he basically talks about, this is where again he mentions the freedmen, where he's like, unless the Constitution should restrain them, I fear that they'll just keep discriminating and crush the hated freedmen, right? So like if the Constitution itself does not include this restriction, this is what the states will do to the freedmen because they're so hated, right? And I actually thought when I read that line, I was like, you know what? What would they hate more than a slave? A freedman, right? Because what you hate more than a slave would be someone who you can't tell what to do, who doesn't listen to your every command, who uh, can make and control their own free labor, own all their property. So it goes into the psychology of realizing, yeah, more than they hate a slave, they would hate a freedman because it's the opposite of everything they believe. Um, and so, yeah, I was about to go to Lloyd. I don't know. Hopefully, he'll come back. But yeah, it made me really realize that for the first time. Like, yeah, it's obvious that they would hate. Oh, cool. Lloyd is back. Black, did you want to say something?
Yeah, a quick follow up. So,
Lloyd, we'll get you right next. Go for it real quick, Black.
okay, yeah. So the follow up to that right to bear arms and the fear in those southern states was the right to vote. And in order to protect your right to vote, you had to have the ability to bear arms. So they are intricately connected.
Yeah, definitely. Even when you look at a lot of the tactics used to stop us from expressing our vote, it was uh, because we didn't have the right, or we weren't allowed the right, like the right to bear arms wasn't enforced. Either if we used it, we wouldn't get a just due in court, or we weren't allowed to even buy it due to taxes or legislation that prohibited. Lloyd, go for it.
Hey everybody, thank you for bringing me up. I'm going to be going through, just FYI, I'm going to be going back and forth between news toters space and this one because they're both so very important. What I want to say about this particular topic, and I think what Ketanji is doing, is to change our mindset to the point where we are no longer justifying the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments because we don't have to. The law is what it is, and we need to begin working from a mindset of defending our right to bear arms and that we're full citizens. We are not freedmen citizens. We are full citizens that happen to be freedmen. And until we stop justifying our existence, they're going to continue to make us justify everything that we do. Does that make sense? I'm just saying, like Nike says, just do it. I'll learn it right now.
Yeah, I think I've expressed this in another way where when people ask about our right to vote or our right to bear arms or any of these things, they say, well, where do we get our rights from in these? And then they'll point to certain amendments. Well, it's like, well, where do white people get these rights? Where does their right to any of these so-called innate or inherent natural rights come from? Where ours come from the same place. We don't, like Lloyd said, we don't have to necessarily justify our rights by having extra and more legislation and amendments to reaffirm things that are already written. Um, and that is something I do believe in, something where um, it is good that we had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but in terms of, like Black majority was saying, 1 through 8, and even the rest of them that came after, all of these are ours inherently, and there's no new kind of legislation that we should have to manufacture to have our rights protected. Um, it's more of a matter of fact that these rights need to be enforced rather than new legislation to be written. Yeah. Any other thoughts about this?
Actually, I did.
Yeah, go for it.
Actually, I really think that this new thing with California, San Francisco, plays into this discussion because I don't know if y'all have seen it today, but the city of San Francisco is proposing to pay all Black and African American citizens that have lived there or that were born between 1940 and 1996 a lump sum payment of $5 million and wipe away all their debt, and then they want to give anybody that's poor, and how you would be poor with $5 million, I don't know, but they want to supplement their income up to $97,000 a year. Well, here's the thing: when you go back and read what they're talking about, they are using the language Black and African American. After the California Reparations Committee already determined that any reparations should be lineage based and not race based. So I think that this is all part and parcel of that. When you talk about Ketanji using the term freedmen, everybody has got to start jumping on that term, because if not, we're including immigrants. And that means that when we get reparations done at the federal level, if we're using Black and African American, still using those terms, they're going to be included. And I just want to point that out.
Yeah, I was looking at that proposal, and one of the things it basically tried to use a Darity like requirement about identifying as Black or African American for 10 years. The mistake, like you said, is that it omitted the part about freedmen. There was no mention of like freedmen or the fact that you had to really be a descendant of slaves. Most of the requirements said things like basically you got to be born in San Francisco from this date to this date, and then you need to have lived in San Francisco for like 13 years. Um, so without the eligibility also including being a freedman, you could potentially get people who are not descendants.
Well, to me, that's why they wrote the language the way they wrote it, was to do an end run around lineage based. Because they came out with this recently. California, that was a year ago. Back in June when Marcel was running, is when the California committee voted to make it lineage based. And so here's the thing about that. You know that if the federal government puts out a law, a state has to live up to that law, but it can add to it. It can't take anything away from the law, but it can add to it. And so that same thing works for the state and local municipalities. So by putting Black and African American, those people knew exactly what they were doing.
I think it's potentially part of part ignorance and part like them trying to pay attention, but they don't know everything. So, for example, like the AB 3121 stuff, um, it only the lineage based vote only applies to AB 3121, and that um, body still has to report their commission, their final report on July 1st, 2023, to the legislature, and that they still would have to pass it. You have SB 189 that was passed that had the Freedmen language in it, but that only applies to state employees. So there is somewhat of a legislative blind spot here in terms of like what's required. But you can certainly see that what San Francisco is trying to do in terms of using the fact that you need to say that you're Black or African American for 10 years. It's like an attempt at them trying to know something, but them not knowing all the context of AB 3121 or SB 189, and them not going far enough to include the Freedmen language.
Well, here's the thing. If you use before the this push to get the Freedmen ethnicity designator, there was nothing else you could be. You could only be Black or African American if you were of the diaspora. That's all you could be. And that's the whole point of Freedmen says, no, we're much more than that. So I'm going to say, I understand your belief in humanity, but I'm thinking this is very intentional. And it's to do an end run around the Freedmen language, period. Because how in the world can we be relitigating this again?
No, I'm not saying whether it's intentional or not. I don't know, but I'm saying in terms of where things are, it clearly shows a lack of knowledge in terms of the Freedman language, right? Otherwise, it would be there. And whether that lack of knowledge is intentional or not, either way, it results in the same thing, which is the same harm. And I wish the Freedman language was there. That's probably the big thing that's missing. Otherwise, this would be overall decent. I think the only other problem potentially is why the age or why the date ranges. There could be questions about like why these dates and why not other dates. But yeah, let me go to a few more. Once I go, because we are about to close soon. So let me go to Miss T, and then we'll come back around. Go for it, Miss T.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Freeman Party, thank you for hosting this space. I'm looking forward to your spaces each night. But in regards to San Francisco, is that really reparations, or could that be an atonement for because of the time period that they're reduced it down to? I mean, if you're 80 or 90 in San Francisco, I guess you just SOL. But that's not really reparations what they're asking for, is it? It's more like a city act of atonement.
So reparations again has 5 definitions. You have to have restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and discontinuation. So unless a program includes all 5 of those parts, it is not reparations.
Okay.
This program, yeah, this program is an attempt at it, but it's not meeting all 5 qualifiers in the context of who it's for. One of the definitions of reparations about defines who the victims are, and it says the victims are those who collectively suffered the harm and their descendants. So this so far has not clearly specified the act for the specified victims of the harm, right? So it's already kind of missing that part. And then everything else, it has the compensation part um, pretty close. We have a calculation at 6 million. So this is like, you know, close in that sense. But in terms of everything else, restitution, um, rehabilitation, satisfaction, discontinuation, those don't seem to meet the bar. Um, so it's lacking in many respects. Um, Judge, did you want to say something?
I do, if I can. Hi, Freeman. First, I want to thank you for taking time. You've done so much over the months, and I listen when I can, and you are so appreciated. You know what? What I want to speak to, I want to speak about what you just said. What you said about the, I believe the 13th and the 14th Amendment. What your feeling was is that they need to adhere to those laws and those rules, and it doesn't need to be changed. And Freeman, I kind of challenge that. I think there needs to be an update to the 14th Amendment. I think Black people need additional protection, explicit protection, where the verbiage is explicit about our protection. The problem is we live in a white supremacist collective conscience, that we are secondary, they are primary. That is the consciousness of this country. I am documenting the abuse done to Black people every day in every industry, in government, in retail. In this country, we are seen as secondary. Even good white people, if they have a conflict with a Black person, they're going to weaponize our Blackness. It is important there is an update to the 14th Amendment and that our protection is explicit and is clear. Do you understand what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
appreciate what you're saying, but the problem occurs is that these judges have discretion. In the case of Trayvon Martin, in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, when there is a black person, black people need additional protection, just like the people. What do they have protection for? Like I'm so sorry, the words like coming to me. Like for
American Indians.
For like animals that have been extinct.
Oh yeah.
What am I trying to say?
What's it called? Endangered animals. Species or endangered species.
That's the word I'm using, and I am documenting that in a court of law. I can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. This country knows that, and therefore we need for reparations. I'm not mad about a check. You want to pay me a check? Pay me a check. If I'm equal, I can get my own money. It's America. I just need repair, and I need to be equal. So I think we do need legislation that protects us.
So yeah, let me say something to that, and then I'll go to Lloyd, and then we'll do last thoughts before we wrap up. If you read the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, they all have at least one section that says the following: the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So what that says both for the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and I'm pretty certain also for the 15th Amendment, all of them are basically saying if anything in this act is not clear, Congress shall be able to make additional legislation that it reinforces these amendments, that gives it the same power. So in that sense, if we need to make additions, and we actually had a conversation on the 13th about does the 13th Amendment need amending, and we talked about which parts we can amend and things like that. And so, again, in the 13th Amendment, it says Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So that again means that we can make appropriate legislation passed by Congress that enforces the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments where it's so-called weak or where it's not done appropriately. Um, Let me go to Lloyd, and then we'll do last thoughts before we wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to you, Bree, that you are really good at research, and I think the question that you asked earlier would really deserve some research. Let's look. The numbers are 1940 to 1996. So let's look at when the bulk of black immigrants started coming to this country. And I'll bet you $1, we're gonna find that the bulk of them started coming between 1940 and 1996.
Yeah, in terms of what I know so far, most of them came, basically after the civil rights era, and then it peaks between like the 90s and the early 2000s.
And I'll just say this to Judge. Judge, I hear you, but the one thing that we have to be careful about is that we don't continue to ask, that we don't get unintended consequences. Meaning, if we have to continue to ask them to protect us, then they will be in charge of us. So we're asking our abusers to become our protectors. I think that we have to come up with something different. I don't know what that looks like right now, but I think that we really need to begin thinking that we don't have to ask to be citizens. We are full citizens. And the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments did not grant us that. That granted it to them in their mind. But I will say this, any of my ancestors and myself, we were born full human beings in this country with the same rights they had. They just were they just were oppressing us.
Yeah, I understand. And Lloyd, I know that we are human beings. You know what, Lloyd, I'm going to the party. We are the people. The Black Party. I'm very clear about politics and the law. We have to go to judicial method just like anyone else. Just like Roe versus Wade. You see those white people got that overturned? We have to put in the effort. We have to be available and show up. We are the people. I'm not asking for anything. We are the people.
Yeah, definitely.
We're on the same page.
Yeah, let's do some last thoughts. Anybody, my co-host, inspired a boogie? Any last thoughts?
Oh no, man. Just thank you for holding the space. It was just an education space for me tonight.
I've heard this quote from Ketanji Brown Jackson before. It's just re-emphasizing, in my mind and what she was talking about, and it also brings some questions up in my mind too about how they know about the Freedmen language, but they haven't included in HR 40. So, it's just those things that kind of run across my mind. But everybody in the space, you can go to Freedmen.org, check our web page, check our party page. I greatly appreciate it if you retweet the space as well. That's all I got for tonight, though.
Thank you for that, bro. Inspired, go for it.
I'm sorry, I'm parenting over here, but I do want to say, great space. I really like what Black Majority brought up as it relates to the 14th Amendment, how it linked and granted us access to 1 through 8 are the ones prior to that 14. That's very important as we talk about our specific lineage and citizenship. We need to start stressing that more. And also, as it relates to status, we should have the same status as the Indian nations have as it relates to sovereignty. We don't need additional protections. We need sovereignty. And with the development of our own Freedmen government. And also, Ketanji Brown, Justice Brown, really laid the foundation in that one case for us to have an argument as it relates to Freedmen. If anybody questions, excuse my background, if anybody questions our legitimacy and political status, they can no longer do so. She laid that groundwork in her first argument. I love it.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very clear. Um, you know, it's ironic when people choose to reference that argument and then omit the Friedman word. Um, so look out for that because not only does her statement bring up Freeman twice, but she references Thaddeus Stevens, who introduced the 14th Amendment, and his joint resolution that Ketanji Brown references talks about Freedmen 3 times in it. And it's very clear about, what all, again, these acts are for and why the Freedmen need the protections and so forth. So, with that, thank you all for coming. We'll be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. Um, Please share out the space, set your reminders, let everybody know. Thank you all again. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.